The Zarkonian Empire had conquered 47 star systems in the last 300 years. Their ships were faster than light, their weapons could destroy planets, and their soldiers were bred for war. When they found Earth, a small blue planet orbiting an average star, they laughed. The beings living there were still fighting each other with primitive weapons. They had not even colonized their own moon properly. Warlord Thexnor stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the planet spin below him. His mandibles clicked together in what his species considered amusement. He turned to his officers and announced that this invasion would be over in less than one rotation of their home world. His crew shared his confidence. After all, they had never lost a war. The invasion fleet consisted of 300 warships. Each ship carried enough firepower to level a city. Each soldier wore armor that could withstand conventional bullets and explosives. Their shields could deflect missiles and artillery shells. They had studied Earth's military capabilities and found them laughable. The humans still used gunpowder and chemical rockets. Their most advanced fighters could barely break the sound barrier. The Zarkonians had weapons that could bend space itself. This would not be a war. It would be a harvest. The ships appeared over Earth's major cities on a Tuesday morning. New York, London, Beijing, Moscow, Mumbai, Cairo, Sydney, Mexico City, Tokyo, and dozens of other population centers suddenly found themselves in shadow. The alien vessels hung in the sky like massive predators. People stopped in the streets and stared upward. Some screamed, some ran. Most simply froze in shock and terror. The Zarkonians broadcast their message in every human language simultaneously. The translation was simple and direct. Earth now belonged to the Zarkonian Empire. Resistance would be met with destruction. Compliance would be rewarded with survival. Humans had 24 hours to surrender their governments and military forces. In Washington, President Helen Montgomery convened an emergency meeting in the Situation Room deep beneath the White House. General Chris Dalton arrived within minutes, still buttoning his uniform. Dr. Karen Wells from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency came next, carrying 3 tablets and looking like she had not slept in days. Representatives from other nations joined via secure video links. The Russian president looked grim. The Chinese premier was already discussing military options. The British prime minister was coordinating with European allies. For the first time in decades, perhaps centuries, humanity's various nations found themselves united by a common enemy. General Dalton reported the initial findings. Fighter jets from 6 different nations had attempted to engage the alien ships. All had been destroyed or disabled without the aliens firing a single shot. Their shields were impenetrable to everything humanity had thrown at them. Missiles exploded harmlessly against invisible barriers. Bullets bounced off like rain on glass. Even nuclear weapons, tested against an unmanned alien probe that had crashed in Siberia 3 years ago, had proven ineffective. The Zarkonians had studied humanity well. They knew every weapon in Earth's arsenal and had prepared countermeasures for all of them. Dr. Wells cleared her throat and spoke carefully. She explained that conventional warfare would not work against this enemy. Their technology was simply too advanced. However, she noted something interesting in the data. The Zarkonians were arrogant. They had made their presence known everywhere at once. They had not bothered with stealth or strategy. They expected immediate surrender because that was what every other species had given them. This arrogance might be their weakness. If humanity could not defeat them with superior technology, perhaps they could defeat them with superior tactics. After all, humans had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of killing each other. That experience had to count for something. President Montgomery listened carefully to all the reports and recommendations. Then she made a decision that would change the course of the war before it even began. She refused to surrender. Instead, she authorized General Dalton to coordinate a global defense using any means necessary. She gave Dr. Wells unlimited resources and authority to develop new weapons. She told her advisors that humanity would not go quietly into slavery. If the Zarkonians wanted Earth, they would have to pay for it in blood. Around the world, similar decisions were being made. The Russian military mobilized its entire force. Chinese factories began working around the clock to produce weapons and equipment. European nations pooled their resources and knowledge. India, Pakistan, Israel, Iran, North Korea, South Korea, Japan, Brazil, South Africa, and dozens of other nations all came to the same conclusion. They would fight. They had no choice. Surrender meant slavery for their children and the end of human civilization as they knew it. Death was preferable. In Colorado, deep inside a mountain, Colonel Jake Martinez received his orders. He commanded a special operations unit that officially did not exist. His team consisted of the most dangerous soldiers from various military forces. They were experts in sabotage, infiltration, assassination, and guerrilla warfare. Lieutenant Amy Foster, his second-in-command, gathered the team for briefing. Martinez told them the situation plainly. Earth was being invaded by beings with superior technology. Conventional forces could not touch them. But special operations did not rely on superior firepower. They relied on surprise, deception, and hitting the enemy where they were weakest. The Zarkonians expected humans to fight like civilized soldiers. Martinez intended to show them what uncivilized humans could do. The first Zarkonian ground forces landed in major cities within hours of their initial broadcast. They deployed in formation, weapons ready, expecting resistance. What they got instead confused them. In most places, humans had simply vanished from the streets. The cities seemed empty. Buildings stood silent. The Zarkonians advanced cautiously at first, then with more confidence. Their scanners showed life, signs in the buildings, but nobody emerged to fight or surrender. They began to search structures methodically, following their training and protocols. In Chicago, a Zarkonian patrol of 12 soldiers entered the subway system. They were tracking a group of human life signs that had fled underground. The tunnels were dark and confusing, but their night vision equipment worked perfectly. They spread out in standard formation and began their search. None of them emerged. 3 days later, a recovery team found pieces of their armor scattered throughout 5 different stations. Scrawled on a wall in Zarkonian script were words that roughly translated to "Welcome to Chicago, you are all dead." The recovery team reported this to their commanders, who dismissed it as primitive psychological warfare. But similar incidents were occurring worldwide. In Moscow, a Zarkonian command post was infiltrated by someone wearing a maintenance worker's uniform. The saboteur disabled their shield generators from the inside. Minutes later, artillery strikes leveled the entire building. In Tokyo, alien soldiers found themselves harassed by small arms fire from buildings and rooftops. Every time they returned, fire. The attackers had already moved to new positions. In Mumbai, Zarkonian vehicles were destroyed by improvised explosives hidden in debris and rubble. The aliens had superior technology, but they were fighting in an environment that humans knew intimately. General Dalton coordinated these efforts from the Pentagon. Every attack, every ambush, every act of sabotage was carefully planned and executed. The goal was not to win battles, but to make the occupation as costly as possible. Every Zarkonian casualty was a victory. Every delay was a success. While the military kept the aliens busy, Dr. Wells worked on developing weapons that could penetrate their shields. She studied captured alien technology and dead alien bodies. She recruited the best scientists from every nation, and slowly, carefully, humanity began to learn the secrets of their enemy. President Montgomery addressed the world via every available channel. She told humanity that the fight had just begun. She told them that surrender was not an option. She told them that every person, every nation, every soldier and civilian had a role to play. Humanity had survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, and countless disasters. They would survive this too. The Zarkonians had made a terrible mistake. They had invaded Earth laughing. They would not be laughing for long. Warlord Thexnor had never experienced failure before. In 40 years of military service, he had conquered 15 worlds and pacified countless rebellions. Now he stood in his command chamber, reviewing reports that made no sense. Humans, primitive beings with inferior technology, were defeating his forces through sheer unpredictability. They attacked supply lines. They sabotaged equipment. They turned their own cities into death traps. Worst of all, they were learning. Every Zarkonian tactic was studied, countered, and exploited. Thexnor had requested reinforcements 3 times. Each request had been denied. The Empire was fighting rebellions on 7 other worlds, all inspired by humanity's resistance. Emperor Vextal had made his position clear. Thexnor would conquer Earth with the forces he had, or he would die trying. The Zarkonian Empire operated on a simple principle. When a world resisted, you increased pressure until it broke. Thexnor ordered orbital bombardment of military targets across Earth. Kinetic strikes from space demolished army bases, naval yards, and air force installations. Cities that harbored resistance cells were threatened with annihilation. Thexnor broadcast a message to humanity: surrender now or watch your civilization burn. He expected capitulation. He received defiance instead. President Montgomery responded with her own broadcast. Every human was a soldier now. Every city was a fortress. The Zarkonians could destroy buildings, but they could not destroy the will to fight. Humanity would resist until the last breath of the last human. The message resonated across the planet. Resistance intensified. In Geneva, the newly formed Earth Defense Council coordinated the global war effort. Representatives from every nation met daily, sharing intelligence and resources. General Chris Dalton commanded ground forces worldwide. Commodore Lisa Chen coordinated space operations. Dr. Karen Wells led research and development. They worked as a unified command for the first time in human history. Old rivalries and conflicts were set aside. Russian scientists worked with American engineers. Chinese strategists collaborated with European tacticians. The Middle East, Africa, Asia, and the Americas all contributed soldiers, resources, and knowledge. Humanity had finally united, and the catalyst had been an alien invasion. The irony was not lost on anyone. Dr. Wells's resonator weapons were being mass-produced in factories across the globe. The devices looked simple, like handheld radios with modified antennas. But they were devastatingly effective against Zarkonian biology. Field tests showed that Zarkonians exposed to the resonator's frequency experienced severe disorientation, pain, and temporary paralysis. The effect lasted several minutes, enough time for human soldiers to either capture or kill disabled enemies. Wells also developed portable EMP devices specifically tuned to disrupt Zarkonian shield generators. These devices had a limited range and single-use capacity, but they gave human forces the ability to breach alien defenses for the first time. General Jake Martinez planned an operation that would test these new weapons on a large scale. In the Amazon rainforest, a major Zarkonian base coordinated their South American operations. The base was heavily defended and considered impregnable by conventional forces. Martinez intended to prove otherwise. He assembled a strike force of 800 soldiers from 12 nations. They were equipped with resonators, portable EMPs, and traditional weapons. Martinez planned a multi-phase assault that would use the jungle itself as a weapon. The Zarkonians had sensors and aircraft, but the Amazon was vast, dense, and hostile to anyone unfamiliar with it. Martinez spent 2 weeks training his force in jungle warfare tactics developed over decades of human conflict. By the time they moved on the target, his soldiers could navigate the rainforest better than most Zarkonians could navigate their own ships. The assault began at dawn. Martinez's forces approached from 8 different vectors, moving through terrain that Zarkonian scanners could not penetrate effectively. The thick canopy, dense undergrowth, and heavy moisture in the air created interference that degraded enemy sensors. Human soldiers used this to their advantage, getting within striking distance before being detected. When the attack came, it was coordinated and overwhelming. Teams armed with EMPs disabled sections of the base perimeter. Soldiers with resonators incapacitated guards before they could raise alarms. Within 30 minutes, Martinez's forces had penetrated the outer defenses and were fighting inside the base itself. The battle lasted 6 hours. Zarkonians had superior individual firepower, but humans had superior tactics and numbers. More importantly, humans were fighting in an environment they understood. They used the base's own structure against its defenders, setting ambushes in corridors and using captured alien weapons to devastating effect. Zarkonian reinforcements arrived by air, but they were met by portable surface-to-air missiles provided by various Earth militaries. 3 alien dropships were destroyed before they could land. The others retreated. By noon, the base was in human hands. Martinez ordered it stripped of all useful technology and then destroyed. They could not hold the position against counterattack, but they could deny it to the enemy. The victory came at a cost. Martinez lost 93 soldiers in the assault, with another 140 wounded. But they had killed over 400 Zarkonians and captured enough technology to keep Dr. Wells's research teams busy for months. More importantly, they had proven that humans could take and hold enemy positions. The psychological impact was enormous. Across Earth, resistance forces became more aggressive. They stopped simply harassing the occupation and started actively reclaiming territory. The Zarkonians found themselves pushed out of smaller towns and rural areas, forced to concentrate their forces in major cities. This made them easier targets for orbital strikes from Chen's growing space fleet. Commodore Lisa Chen had expanded her original 7-ship fleet to 23 vessels. Most were converted civilian craft, but 3 were purpose-built warships constructed in orbital shipyards that had been space stations just months earlier. Earth's industrial capacity was being redirected entirely toward the war effort. Factories that once built cars now built armored vehicles. Shipyards that built tankers now built warships. Chemical plants that produced fertilizer now produced explosives. The entire planet had become a war machine, churning out weapons and equipment at a pace the Zarkonians had not anticipated. Chen's fleet conducted hit-and-run raids on enemy positions throughout the Earth-Moon system. They avoided direct confrontation with the main Zarkonian battle group, instead targeting isolated ships and facilities. In Sydney, Captain Nathan Price led a different kind of resistance. Price had been a computer programmer before the invasion. Now he led a team of hackers working to infiltrate Zarkonian computer networks. The aliens used sophisticated encryption and security protocols, but Price's team had captured enough hardware to begin understanding their systems. After 3 months of work, they achieved their first major breakthrough. They hacked into a Zarkonian communication satellite and gained access to tactical frequencies. This allowed Earth forces to monitor enemy communications in real time. They learned about troop movements, supply shipments, and strategic planning. This intelligence proved invaluable for coordinating attacks and avoiding enemy sweeps. But the real prize came when Price's team discovered something the Zarkonians had tried to keep secret. Their invasion force was alone. There were no reinforcements coming. The Empire was stretched too thin, fighting multiple conflicts across their territory. Every species the Zarkonians had ever conquered was rising up, inspired by humanity's example. The empire that had stood for 3,000 years was collapsing under the weight of its own cruelty. This information changed everything. Earth's forces had been fighting a defensive war, trying to survive until they could develop weapons capable of challenging alien technology. Now they realized they did not need to match Zarkonian power. They just needed to outlast them. Time was on humanity's side. President Montgomery authorized a bold strategic shift. Instead of focusing solely on Earth's defense, they would take the fight to the Zarkonians. Dr. Wells had analyzed captured FTL communication technology and believed she could reverse engineer it. If humanity could broadcast messages to other oppressed species, they could coordinate a galaxy-wide rebellion. General Dalton prepared for a major offensive to capture a Zarkonian command ship intact. The ship would contain the codes and technology needed to access the Empire's communication network. Commodore Chen would lead the space assault while Martinez's ground forces prevented enemy reinforcements from interfering. The operation was risky. Failure would mean losing significant portions of Earth's military strength. But success would mean turning the tide of the war permanently. Montgomery consulted with leaders from every nation. The decision was unanimous. Humanity had spent months learning to defend itself. Now it was time to attack. The Zarkonians had invaded expecting an easy conquest. They had underestimated human determination, creativity, and sheer bloody-mindedness. That mistake was about to cost them not just Earth, but their entire empire. Warlord Thexnor received intelligence about increased human activity around their fleet. He dismissed it as desperation. The humans were brave. The Zarkonian occupation of Earth was not going according to plan. Warlord Thexnor studied the casualty reports with growing frustration. In 3 weeks of occupation, his forces had lost more soldiers than in the previous 5 invasions combined. The humans were not fighting like any enemy the Empire had ever encountered. They did not mass their forces for conventional battles. They did not defend fixed positions. Instead, they attacked from shadows and vanished before retaliation could be organized. They used their own cities as weapons, turning every building and street into a potential ambush site. They seemed to know that they could not win a direct confrontation. so they refused to fight directly. In Paris, a Zarkonian supply convoy was destroyed when humans collapsed an entire city block on top of it using carefully placed explosives. The aliens had sensors that could detect most explosive compounds, but the humans had used materials that registered as construction equipment. In Berlin, alien patrols began disappearing in the old underground bunkers that dated back to ancient human wars. Search teams found the bodies days later, killed by traps that used simple mechanics rather than advanced technology. In Cairo, Zarkonian forces were harassed constantly by attacks that seemed to come from the civilian population itself. Old men and women would approach checkpoints with baskets, then detonate hidden explosives. Children would point out false targets, leading patrols into ambushes. The entire human population seemed to have become soldiers. Colonel Jake Martinez watched the Zarkonian forward base outside Denver through high-powered binoculars. Lieutenant Amy Foster crouched beside him, studying a tablet that showed thermal readings from the base. They had been observing the enemy for 72 hours, learning their patrol patterns, shift changes, and defensive protocols. Martinez had commanded special operations for 15 years. He had fought in mountains, deserts, jungles, and cities across Earth. He understood that warfare was not about superior technology. It was about understanding your enemy better than they understood you. The Zarkonians had better guns, better armor, and better ships. But they did not understand humans. They did not understand that humans had been killing each other creatively for thousands of years. They were about to learn. Martinez's team consisted of 20 operators from 8 different nations. There were American Special Forces, Russian Spetsnaz, British SS, Israeli Commandos, Chinese Special Operations, and others. Before the invasion, these soldiers might have been enemies. Now they worked together seamlessly. The plan was simple in concept but difficult in execution. They would infiltrate the base, plant explosives on critical systems, and extract before the enemy realized what had happened. They would not try to fight the Zarkonians directly. They would simply take away the infrastructure the aliens needed to operate effectively. The infiltration happened at midnight. Martinez's team approached from 4 different directions, moving slowly through terrain they had studied for days. Zarkonian sensors were sophisticated, but they were calibrated for technology-based threats. The humans carried minimal electronic equipment. Their weapons were suppressed firearms and bladed weapons. They wore simple camouflage rather than advanced stealth technology. They moved like hunters stalking prey, patient and careful. It took them 3 hours to cross 200 meters. When they reached the perimeter, they did not try to breach it. Instead, they waited for a patrol to pass, then followed the patrol inside using their own sensor shadow as cover. Inside the base, Martinez split his team into 4 groups. Each group had a specific target: power generators, communication arrays, vehicle maintenance facilities, and ammunition storage. They had 40 minutes to complete their objectives and reach the extraction point. Foster led the team targeting communications. She placed shape charges on 3 separate antenna arrays, charges designed to look like equipment malfunctions rather than sabotage. Another team disabled power generators by introducing contaminants into their fuel supplies. A third team planted tracking devices on alien vehicles so human forces could monitor their movements. The fourth team, led by Martinez himself, did something the Zarkonians would never expect. They freed prisoners. The Zarkonians had captured several hundred humans during the initial invasion. Most were soldiers, but some were scientists and government officials. They were being held in a detention facility at the center of the base for eventual transport off-world. Martinez's team reached the facility without encountering resistance. The guards were confident in their base's perimeter security and had not posted adequate internal patrols. This overconfidence cost them their lives. Martinez's team neutralized the guards silently and began evacuating prisoners. Most of the rescued humans were weak from interrogation and poor conditions, but they could walk. Martinez distributed weapons to those who could fight and detailed 2 operators to escort the others out. The extraction did not go smoothly. An alarm sounded when the first charges detonated. Suddenly, the entire base was alerted. Zarkonians poured from their barracks, weapons ready, searching for the infiltrators. Martinez's team had anticipated this. They did not try to fight their way out. Instead, they scattered in 12 different directions, using the confusion and darkness to their advantage. The Zarkonians had numbers and firepower, but they did not know the terrain as well as the humans did. They did not know that Martinez had spent the previous week mapping every gully, hill, and hiding spot within 5 kilometers of the base. They did not know that human sniper teams were positioned to cover the retreat. They did not know that they were being led into a secondary ambush. By dawn, Martinez's entire team had reached the rally point. They had lost one operator, killed by enemy fire during extraction. They had rescued 93 prisoners. They had destroyed or disabled enough equipment to render the forward base ineffective for weeks. More importantly, they had proven something crucial. The Zarkonians could be hurt. Their bases could be penetrated. Their forces could be beaten with tactics and planning. Word of the operation spread throughout Earth's resistance networks. If Martinez could do it in Denver, others could do it elsewhere. In orbit above Earth, Commodore Lisa Chen commanded a very different kind of operation. Chen had been captain of a commercial cargo ship before the invasion. Now she commanded the Defiant, a jury-rigged warship built from a cargo hauler, 3 mining vessels, and parts scavenged from destroyed alien craft. Her crew consisted of former cargo pilots, mining engineers, and a handful of military advisors who understood space combat. They were preparing to attack a Zarkonian supply depot on the dark side of the moon. The depot supplied the occupation forces on Earth with everything from ammunition to food. Destroying it would not end the invasion, but it would make the aliens' job significantly harder. Chen's fleet consisted of 7 converted civilian vessels. None of them were designed for combat. They had improvised weapons, makeshift armor, and navigation systems meant for hauling freight, not fighting battles. But they had advantages the Zarkonians did not expect. They were small enough to avoid detection until close range. They were expendable, built from salvaged materials rather than manufactured to precise specifications. Most importantly, they were commanded by humans who understood that sometimes you had to sacrifice pieces to win the game. Chen had studied ancient Earth naval warfare, from wooden sailing ships to modern carrier groups. She understood that battles were won through positioning, timing, and the willingness to take risks. The attack began with a decoy. One of Chen's ships, commanded by Captain Greg Palmer, approached the depot broadcasting false distress signals. The ship appeared to be a damaged freighter seeking emergency docking. Zarkonian protocols required them to investigate potential salvage. While their attention was focused on the decoy, Chen's remaining ships approached from 3 other vectors, hidden in the shadow of the moon itself. They fired their weapons simultaneously, targeting the depot's shield generators. The weapons were crude by Zarkonian standards, simple railguns that accelerated metal slugs to high velocity. But at close range, they were effective. The shields flickered and failed. Chen ordered the second wave. Her ships launched every missile they had, nearly 200 improvised warheads built from mining explosives and scavenged guidance systems. The Zarkonians scrambled defensive fire, destroying most of the missiles. But not all. 17 warheads struck the depot. Explosions rippled across its surface. Atmosphere vented into space. Secondary explosions followed as stored ammunition cooked off. Chen watched the depot break apart and felt no satisfaction. 3 of her ships had been destroyed in the attack. 47 crew members were dead. But the mission was successful. The Zarkonians had lost their primary supply point. They would have to ship everything from their home worlds now, which would take weeks. Back on Earth, Dr. Karen Wells presented her findings to President Montgomery and General Dalton. She had been studying captured alien technology nonstop since the invasion began. Her team had made a breakthrough. Zarkonian shields operated on rotating frequencies that made them nearly impenetrable. However, their biological systems were vulnerable to specific electromagnetic frequencies. Wells had developed a weapon she called the Resonator. The operation to capture a Zarkonian command ship was named Operation Prometheus. Dr. Karen Wells chose the name after the ancient Greek titan who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. The symbolism was appropriate. Humans were about to steal the technology that would let them speak to the galaxy. General Chris Dalton approved a battle plan that required perfect coordination between space and ground forces. Commodore Lisa Chen would assault the target ship in orbit, while General Jake Martinez led an attack on the Zarkonian ground base to prevent reinforcements from launching. The timing had to be exact. Any mistake would result in catastrophic casualties. Chen's fleet had grown to 31 ships. Most were still converted civilian vessels, but 6 were proper warships built in the orbital yards that humanity had constructed in desperate haste. These ships were ugly compared to sleek Zarkonian vessels, but they were functional and deadly. Chen's flagship was the Destiny, a cruiser built from 2 cargo haulers welded together and armed with railguns, missile batteries, and 1 experimental energy weapon that Dr. Wells swore would work, but had never been tested in combat. Chen trusted Wells, but hoped she would not need to find out if that trust was justified. The crew of the Destiny numbered 200 people from 15 nations. They had trained together for 6 weeks. That was nowhere near enough time to build proper cohesion, but it was all they had. The target was the Retribution, Warlord Thexnor's personal command ship. Intelligence provided by Captain Nathan Price's hacking team indicated that the Retribution contained communication codes for the entire Zarkonian fleet. More importantly, it had the encryption keys needed to access the Empire's FTL network. If humanity could capture that ship intact, they could broadcast messages across the galaxy. They could coordinate with other enslaved species. They could turn the Zarkonian Empire's greatest strength, its vast territory, into a fatal weakness. Every world would become a potential rebellion. The Empire would be forced to choose between abandoning Earth or losing everything else. Either option suited humanity perfectly. Chen studied the tactical display showing Zarkonian fleet positions. The Retribution was protected by 9 escort vessels and positioned in high orbit above the Atlantic Ocean. Getting to it would require fighting through a defensive screen that had repelled every previous attack. Chen's plan relied on deception and overwhelming force applied at a single point. She would send decoy forces against other parts of the Zarkonian fleet, drawing their attention and resources. Then she would hit the Retribution with everything she had before they could respond. It was a simple plan. Simple plans had the best chance of working when everything was going wrong. Chen knew from experience that everything always went wrong. On the ground, General Martinez assembled his strike force outside what remained of Rio de Janeiro. The Zarkonian ground base there was their largest facility in South America. It housed their main spaceport, supply depot, and garrison. If reinforcements were going to launch to save the Retribution, they would come from here. Martinez had 2,000 soldiers under his command. They faced an estimated 5,000 Zarkonians protected by heavy weapons, aircraft, and fortifications. The odds were not good. Martinez had faced worse odds before and survived. He briefed his officers on the plan. They would attack in 3 waves. The first would use resonators and EMPs to breach the perimeter. The second would push into the base itself. The third would hold the spaceport and prevent any ships from launching. Simple, direct, and probably suicidal. Martinez's officers accepted their orders without complaint. They knew what was at stake. The operation began at midnight. Chen's decoy forces attacked Zarkonian positions around the globe simultaneously. In orbit above Tokyo, 3 human destroyers engaged 4 enemy frigates. Above Moscow, a converted mining vessel rammed a Zarkonian supply ship, destroying both vessels. Near the lunar facility, 5 human ships launched a missile barrage that forced the enemy to respond with their reserves. The Zarkonians reacted exactly as Chen hoped. They saw multiple threats and divided their forces to counter them. The Retribution's escort pulled back to support other positions. For 40 minutes, the command ship would be vulnerable. Chen ordered her fleet to attack. 20 ships accelerated toward the Retribution at maximum burn. Zarkonian sensors detected them immediately, but it was too late to recall the escorts. The Retribution's captain, Sub-Commander Kralix, ordered his ship to full defensive posture. Shields came to maximum power, point defense systems activated. The command ship began launching its own fighters. Kralix was confident. His ship was the most powerful vessel in the fleet. These primitive humans could not possibly threaten it. He watched the human ships approach and prepared to destroy them. What he did not know was that Chen had no intention of fighting fairly. The human fleet split into 3 groups as they approached. One group fired missiles, hundreds of them, forcing the Retribution's point defenses to engage. Another group used their railguns to hammer the shields, creating fluctuations in the defensive field. The third group, led by Chen herself, waited for the perfect moment. When the shields flickered for just a fraction of a second, Chen fired the experimental weapon Wells had installed on the Destiny. The weapon was based on captured Zarkonian technology, but modified with human ingenuity. It did not fire a projectile or energy beam. Instead, it created a temporary hole in space-time itself, a micro-wormhole that lasted less than a second. But that was enough. The hole bypassed the shields entirely and struck the Retribution's hull. The damage was minimal, But the psychological impact was enormous. The Zarkonians realized their shields were not invincible. Chen pressed the attack. Her ships closed to knife-fighting range, too close for the Retribution's main guns to target effectively. Human Marines in boarding pods launched from several ships, attaching to the enemy hull like parasites. The Marines cut through the outer armor using plasma torches and breached the ship. Inside, they faced Zarkonian security forces. The fighting was brutal in close quarters. Humans had developed tactics specifically for boarding actions, based on centuries of naval warfare experience. They used speed and aggression to overwhelm defenders before organized resistance could form. Within 20 minutes, human Marines controlled 3 decks of the Retribution. Within an hour, they held the bridge. Sub-Commander Kralix was captured alive. He stood in his own command center, surrounded by humans in battle armor, and could not comprehend what had happened. His ship was supposed to be invincible. His forces were supposed to be superior. Instead, he had been defeated by beings he considered primitives. Chen entered the bridge and surveyed the scene. She ordered her technical teams to secure the communication systems and download everything. Then she had the prisoners taken to holding cells. The Retribution was hers. Operation Prometheus had succeeded. Humanity now had access to Zarkonian communication networks. On the ground, Martinez's assault on the spaceport was not going as well. His first wave had breached the perimeter successfully. The resonators and EMPs had disabled the initial defenses, but the Zarkonians had reinforced their positions after previous attacks. They had learned from their mistakes and adapted their tactics. Martinez's second wave ran into a prepared defense with interlocking fields of fire and heavy weapons. The fighting devolved into a grinding battle of attrition. Humans pushed forward meter by meter, paying for each advance with blood. Martinez committed his reserves and personally led the assault on the main hangar. If they could take the hangar, they could prevent any ships from launching. Lieutenant Amy Foster fought beside Martinez as they cleared the hangar of enemy forces. Zarkonian soldiers had taken positions behind parked aircraft and supply crates. Every corner concealed a potential ambush. Foster's squad used grenades and suppressing fire to advance. They were 50 meters from the hangar control room when Warlord Thexnor himself appeared. The Zarkonian commander had decided to lead a counterattack personally. He was massive, nearly 3 meters tall, wearing ceremonial armor and carrying a weapon that could vaporize a human with a single shot. Thexnor roared a challenge in his own language and advanced on the human forces. Martinez did not hesitate. He grabbed a resonator from a fallen soldier and fired it at maximum power. The electromagnetic pulse hit Thexnor directly. The warlord staggered but did not fall. His armor provided some protection, but it was enough. While Thexnor was disoriented, a dozen human soldiers opened fire simultaneously. Armor designed to withstand energy weapons proved less effective against old-fashioned bullets fired from multiple angles. Thexnor fell. The great warlord who had conquered 15 worlds died on Earth, killed by the primitives he had mocked. The death of Thexnor broke the Zarkonian defense. Their command structure collapsed. Soldiers who had fought with confidence suddenly lost their will to continue. Some surrendered. Others retreated. Within an hour, Martinez controlled the spaceport. Not a single enemy ship had managed to launch. The operation had cost him 300 soldiers dead and 500 wounded. But they had succeeded. The Retribution was captured. The spaceport was secured. And Warlord Thexnor, the architect of Earth's invasion, was dead. Dr. Karen Wells stood in the communications center that had been hastily constructed from Zarkonian technology and human ingenuity. The captured systems from the Retribution were spread across 3 rooms, each monitored by teams of scientists and technicians. Wells had slept maybe 6 hours in the last 4 days. Her eyes were red and her hands shook from too much coffee, but she smiled because they had done it. Humanity could now broadcast across the Zarkonian Empire's FTL network. Every ship, every base, every communication relay would receive the message. Wells typed the final commands and looked at President Helen Montgomery. The president nodded. Wells pressed the transmission button. The message was simple. Earth had been invaded by the Zarkonian Empire. Earth had fought back. Earth had won. The great warlord Thexnor was dead. His command ship was captured. His invasion force was broken. Humanity offered alliance to any species willing to rise against their oppressors. Included with the message were tactical data on Zarkonian weaknesses information about their military doctrine, and proof that the Empire could be defeated. The message went out in 87 languages, targeting every known subject species. Wells calculated that it would reach the farthest corners of the Empire within 72 hours. Then they would see what happened. What happened exceeded their wildest expectations. Within a week, rebellions erupted on 19 worlds. Within 2 weeks, 37. By the end of the month, the Zarkonian Empire was fighting active conflicts on 63 separate planets. Their military, designed to conquer and occupy, was spread impossibly thin, trying to suppress simultaneous uprisings across their territory. Each rebellion learned from humanity's tactics: guerrilla warfare, sabotage, turning the occupiers' strength into weakness. The Empire's communication networks carried messages of hope instead of commands. Their supply lines, stretched across light years, collapsed under sustained attack. The great empire that had stood for 3,000 years was tearing itself apart. On Earth, Subcommander Kralix had assumed command after Thexnor's death. He stood in the operations center of the Zarkonian occupation force and watched his authority crumble in real time. Reports flooded in from across the planet. Human forces were no longer raiding. They were advancing. Cities that had been under occupation for months were being liberated. Zarkonian bases were falling one after another. His fleet in orbit was under constant attack from Chen's growing space navy. He had requested reinforcements and evacuation 6 times. Each request had been denied or ignored. The Empire had no resources to spare. Every ship was needed elsewhere. Kralix was alone, commanding an army that was losing a war it could not win. General Jake Martinez led the liberation of Mexico City. His forces, now numbering 10,000 soldiers from 20 nations, pushed through the city in a coordinated assault. The Zarkonians fought desperately, but they were outnumbered and demoralized. Martinez's troops had been equipped with weapons built from captured alien technology. They had armor that could withstand Zarkonian small arms. They had vehicles that could match alien speed and firepower. Most importantly, they had momentum. The humans knew they were winning. The Zarkonians knew they were losing. That psychological edge made all the difference. By sunset, Mexico City was free. Martinez stood in the central plaza where Zarkonian commanders had announced Earth's subjugation 6 months earlier. Now that plaza held celebrating humans waving flags from every nation on Earth. Commodore Lisa Chen commanded the largest space battle humanity had ever fought. Her fleet had grown to 73 ships. The Zarkonian fleet numbered 41 vessels after months of attrition. Chen had numerical superiority for the first time. She used it ruthlessly. Her ships attacked in coordinated waves, focusing fire on individual targets until they were destroyed. The Zarkonians tried to maintain formation, but their defensive doctrine was designed for fighting inferior opponents. They had no experience fighting an enemy that matched their technology and exceeded their numbers. Chen's forces pressed the attack for 18 hours straight. When it was over, the Zarkonian fleet had been reduced to 12 ships. Those 12 ships were in no condition to continue fighting. They requested terms for withdrawal. President Montgomery convened the Earth Defense Council to discuss the Zarkonian surrender offer. Subcommander Kralix proposed that his remaining forces be allowed to leave Earth peacefully. In exchange, they would provide all their remaining technology and intelligence about the Empire. They would also testify about war crimes committed during the occupation. Montgomery listened to the proposal and discussed it with her advisors. General Chris Dalton argued for accepting the terms. Continuing to fight would cost human lives unnecessarily. Commodore Chen agreed. They had won. There was no need for vengeance. Dr. Wells supported immediate acceptance so she could study the technology being offered. Martinez remained silent, his face unreadable. He had lost too many soldiers to feel charitable toward the enemy. But he understood the strategic value of letting survivors carry news of their defeat back to what remained of the Empire. Montgomery made her decision. She would accept the surrender with conditions. The Zarkonians would leave Earth immediately. They would leave all equipment, weapons, and technology behind. They would provide complete intelligence on their Empire's military capabilities, star charts, and political structure. Any Zarkonians who wished to face trial for war crimes would remain as prisoners. Those who had not committed atrocities would be allowed to leave. Kralix accepted these terms without negotiation. He had no leverage and knew it. Within 48 hours, the remaining Zarkonian forces departed Earth's orbit. They left behind thousands of dead, hundreds of prisoners, and the wreckage of an invasion that had failed catastrophically. The war for Earth was over. Humanity had won, but the larger war across the galaxy continued. The rebellions that Earth's message had sparked showed no signs of stopping. The Zarkonian Empire was collapsing. Species that had been enslaved for generations were tasting freedom for the first time. Some of these species sent delegations to Earth, seeking advice and alliance. Humanity welcomed them. The planet that had been isolated and unknown 6 months ago suddenly found itself at the center of galactic politics. President Montgomery worked with leaders from across Earth to establish the Terran Alliance, an organization dedicated to supporting free worlds and opposing tyranny wherever it existed in the galaxy. Dr. Wells led the effort to understand and reverse engineer Zarkonian technology. With full access to their systems and databases, human science advanced by decades and months. Wells's teams developed faster-than-light drives, advanced energy weapons, medical technology that could cure diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries, and manufacturing techniques that revolutionized industry. But Wells was careful about how this technology was deployed. She remembered that the Zarkonians had been corrupted by their own power. She recommended strict oversight and ethical guidelines for all advanced technology. Humanity had won a war. Now they had to win the peace. General Martinez retired from active military service. He had fought for 23 years and was tired. He accepted a position training the next generation of Earth's defenders. The United Earth Defense Force was being established as a permanent military organization, drawing personnel from every nation. Martinez would teach them what he had learned fighting the Zarkonians, not just tactics and strategy, but the importance of adaptability, creativity, and never underestimating your enemy. He would also teach them something else. War was sometimes necessary, but it was always terrible. The goal should always be to prevent conflict, not seek it. Humanity had proven it could fight. Now it needed to prove it could build. Commodore Chen accepted promotion to Admiral in command of the Earth Space Navy. Her first assignment was to establish diplomatic contact with the free worlds that had risen against the Zarkonian Empire. Chen traveled to 12 different star systems in the first year after the war. She met species that looked nothing like humans but shared the same desire for freedom and self-determination. She negotiated trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, and cultural exchanges. Earth was no longer alone in the universe. Humanity had allies now. Friends who remembered that it was Earth's example that had given them hope during their darkest hour. The Zarkonian Empire ceased to exist as a political entity 18 months after its invasion of Earth failed. The species itself survived, reduced to a handful of colonies. They were no longer conquerors. They were refugees, seeking permission to settle on worlds they once would have claimed by force. Some species refused them. Others accepted them with conditions. The Zarkonians who settled on these worlds learned humility. They learned that cooperation was more valuable than conquest. They learned that the strong had an obligation to protect the weak, not exploit them. Future generations of Zarkonians would grow up in a galaxy very different from the one their ancestors had dominated. Some adapted. Others clung to the old ways and lived bitter, diminished lives. On Earth, monuments were built to honor those who died defending humanity. President Montgomery dedicated the first memorial on the 1-year anniversary of the invasion. She spoke about sacrifice,